Aeropostal Flight 109 is continuing on its short journey to Santa Barbara del Zulia. They've reached 16,500 feet just a couple of minutes ago when they contact air traffic services to start preparing for the approach.
Santa Barbara, Aeropostal 109, requesting descent to begin approach.
Aeropostal 109, descent approved to 5,500 feet. After this exchange, the first officer started the descent. In their view, they could see large clouds and a lot of fog, something the controller hadn't mentioned, which disrupted their initial visual flight plans. March 5, 1991, La Chinita International Airport, Maracaibo, Venezuela. Here, Aeropostal Flight 109 landed just a few minutes ago. This Venezuelan airline has been operating since 1933, and although it has faced 2 shutdowns, the last in 2017, it still operates flights today with 2 old MD-82s, both over 30 years old. Flight 109 started the day departing from Caracas with its final destination being Santa Barbara del Zulia Airport. Along the way, it made stops in Porlamar, Maracay, and Maracaibo. It's 3:35 p.m. in Venezuela, and it's expected to resume its journey in about 20 minutes to complete the final leg. The aircraft is a DC-931 named El Oriental, which at the time of this 1991 flight was 14 years and 4 months old. The DC-930 series was, by far, the most successful version, with 662 units produced. This model has been so successful that some planes, over 40 years old, have been acquired for use by airlines, mainly in Latin America, such as Acerca Airlines, Power Dominicana, and Aeropostal, which have aircraft that had previously belonged to Northwest Airlines. The DC-930 was so successful that it surpassed the Boeing 737-200 in use. At the controls of Flight 109 are a captain and a first officer, whose names have not been disclosed. Alongside them are 3 other crew members and initially 40 passengers. However, the captain allowed 2 passengers without tickets to board. One of them a National Guard lieutenant who was a helicopter pilot and who would be traveling as a courtesy in the cockpit with the pilots of Flight 109. In total, 47 people were on board the Aeropostal DC-9. At 3:52 p.m., the plane began taxiing towards the runway. As they carried out this maneuver, the pilots performed the required pre-flight checks, but with a radio station blaring at full volume. While the first officer read off some of the flight parameters, the captain responded affirmatively to everything, not paying much attention as he was simultaneously having a conversation with the guest in the cockpit. Therefore, the pre-flight check was done with music blasting in the cockpit and the captain chatting with the National Guard lieutenant. At 3:58 p.m., the plane began its takeoff run. They lifted off without issue and started a rapid climb to flight level 165, their cruising altitude for this short 20-minute flight. Almost the entire journey would be over Lake Maracaibo and would be based on visual flight rules. In the cockpit, nothing had changed since the start of the flight. The captain was still talking with the lieutenant while the first officer was at the controls. The music was still blasting, and they didn't lower it, not even when contacting air traffic control. It's now 4:05 p.m. Aeropostal Flight 109 continues its short journey to Santa Barbara del Zulia. They had reached 16,500 feet just a couple of minutes ago when they contacted ATS to begin preparing for the approach.
Aeropostal 109, requesting descent to begin approach.
Aeropostal 109, descent approved to 5,500 feet. After this exchange, the captain began the descent. Large clouds and heavy fog were visible, something the controller hadn't mentioned, disrupting their visual flight rule plans. The descent plunged them into the fog, but the festive atmosphere in the cockpit still prevailed, even though they could hardly see anything. It took a few more minutes for the captain to realize that something was wrong. Something didn't fit into their flight plan. They couldn't intercept the airport's VOR, and the clouds weren't clearing. Aeropostal 109, we can't intercept the airport's VOR. Is it working correctly? Affirmative. Aeropostal 109, the VOR is operational. After this communication, the captain stopped the descent. He didn't understand what was happening and began climbing again through the surrounding clouds and fog. A few seconds later,
How is this possible? You selected the wrong heading. We were supposed to go heading 193, not 153 like you selected.
and you guys are the pilots? Good thing the 40 people in the back don't know. The loud music in the cockpit was overshadowed by the ground proximity alarm. They couldn't see, didn't know where they were, or what surrounded them. Until seconds later, they saw the mountainside in front of them. The captain pulled on the controls, trying to avoid the mountain, but they couldn't. The DC-932 crashed into the Páramo de las Torres in Trujillo State, far from their intended final destination. All 47 people on board died in the crash. Coincidentally, Flight 109 crashed where 2 other flights had previously done so. In fact, among pilots, this place is known as the Guillotine of the Andes. Initially, the flight was reported missing, as no one knew they had taken the wrong route. Several boats searched Lake Maracaibo for the crashed flight but found nothing. They weren't located until the next day when some locals went out looking for a pair of oxen and instead found the wreckage of Flight 109. What had happened? Could they have saved the flight in any way? The investigation was carried out by Venezuela's Ministry of Transportation and Communications. This investigation confirmed that during the taxi checklist, the first officer selected and announced heading 153, to which the captain gave his approval, even though he knew the correct heading was 193. The loud music and the conversation with the invited lieutenant caused the captain to not pay proper attention to such a basic yet crucial exercise, the pre-flight check of all necessary and important parameters. During the flight, they deviated southeast when their destination was directly south, which took them to Páramo de las Torres. When the captain realized the error, he selected the correct heading, and the plane began to turn directly toward the mountain. Not knowing where they were, they had no choice but to turn back and climb to avoid disaster, but the 40-degree course correction wasn't enough to get them out of the predicament they were in. According to the final report, the captain's severe indiscipline and the lack of a sterile cockpit, combined with the tuning of the aircraft's ADF frequency to a commercial radio station transmitting a music program throughout the flight, were the causes of the Aeropostal Flight 109 crash. Adverse weather conditions present at the time of the incident also contributed. The recommendations and preventive measures issued after the accident were: flight crews must be encouraged to act responsibly and with discipline during flights. Emphasis should be placed on the prohibition of allowing non-crew members to access the cockpit. Aeropostal must improve its passenger control mechanisms to prevent people without tickets from boarding the aircraft.